In the twilight years of a world scarred by the Great War, a new light emerged, promising a future luminous with innovation and untethered by the darkness of the past. It was a light that glowed with an ethereal, almost magical luminescence, a soft, greenish-blue shimmer that captured the imagination of a nation eager for wonders. This was the light of radium, a miracle element, the personal star you could hold in your hand. And for a select group of young women in Orange, New Jersey, it was the light that would illuminate their dreams before plunging them into an unimaginable nightmare. The year was 1917. America was on the precipice of a new era, an age of jazz, flappers, and boundless optimism. In a handsome brick building, the United States Radium Corporation was at the forefront of this new dawn, its most sought-after product being Undark, a revolutionary paint that glowed in the dark. The primary application for this wondrous substance was the faces of watches and military dials, allowing soldiers in the trenches of Europe to tell time in the dead of night. The young women hired to apply this paint were not just factory workers. They were artisans, contributing to the war effort and earning a wage that was the envy of their peers. They were known as the Ghost Girls, for when their shifts ended and they stepped out into the evening, their clothes, their hair, and their skin would faintly glow, a spectral aura that made them figures of minor celebrity in their town. They were the girls who had brushed with magic. Among them was Catherine Schaub, a girl with a quiet determination and a smile that could light up a room almost as much as the paint she worked with. She, along with her friends and co-workers like Grace Fryer and Quinta MacDonald, felt an immense sense of pride in their work. The studio where they worked was often filled with laughter and chatter, the air thick with the faint, sweet smell of the paint and the dust of the glowing powder. The work was delicate, requiring a steady hand and a keen eye. The watch faces were small, the numbers minuscule. To achieve the necessary precision, the girls were taught a technique that would later become a chilling hallmark of their tragedy: lip, dip, paint. They would twirl the tip of the camel hair brush between their lips to give it a fine point, dip it into the crucible of shimmering green paint, and then apply the radium-laced substance to the dials. Lip, dip, paint. Again and again, hundreds of times a day. When they asked if the paint was safe, their managers, men in lab coats who handled the raw radium with lead-lined gloves and tongs, assured them it was. In fact, they told the girls that a little radium was good for them. It was a health tonic, a source of vitality. The papers were filled with advertisements for radium-infused water, cosmetics, and even butter, all promising to invigorate and cure a myriad of ailments. To the girls, the fine glowing dust that settled on their clothes and in their lungs was nothing more than a harmless, glamorous byproduct of their well-paying jobs. They were earning as much as 3 times the average factory wage, allowing them to buy the latest fashions, help support their families, and enjoy a level of independence that was still a novelty for women of their time. For fun, some of the girls would paint their nails with the glowing substance, or even dust it on their teeth for a smile that would dazzle in the dark. They were young, full of life, and blissfully unaware that the very substance that provided their livelihood was silently and insidiously betraying them. The first shadow fell not with a sudden crash, but with a slow, creeping dread. It began with ailments that seemed innocuous at first. A persistent toothache for one girl, a nagging ache in the jaw for another. Molly Maggia, one of the first to work at the studio, was among the first to fall ill. Her dentist pulled a tooth, but the socket refused to heal, the pain intensifying. More teeth were extracted, but the decay continued, a foul-smelling rot that consumed her jawbone. the doctors were baffled. They diagnosed her with everything from rheumatism to syphilis, the latter a cruel and baseless accusation that added crucial and shame to her suffering. Soon other girls began to experience similar horrific symptoms. Grace Fryer started to feel a searing pain in her jaw. An X-ray revealed a bone that was honeycombed with decay, a sight that stunned her physicians. They had never seen anything like it. Catherine Schaub began to suffer from a debilitating anemia, her body racked with a mysterious and profound fatigue. The once vibrant and energetic young women were now gaunt and frail, their bodies breaking down from within in a way that defied medical understanding. The U.S. Radium Corporation was quick to deny any connection between the girls' illnesses and their work. They insisted the radium was harmless and sought to discredit the women, suggesting their conditions were due to poor hygiene or pre-existing diseases. The company had a vested interest in maintaining the public's faith in radium. It was a $1 million industry, and the dial painters were the linchpin of their most profitable venture. As more women fell ill, a grim pattern began to emerge. The ailments were concentrated among the dial painters, and the symptoms were unnervingly similar. A persistent ache would evolve into a complete decay of the bone, particularly the jaw. Tumors, both benign and malignant, began to appear. Their spines would crumble, their legs would shorten, and they would be left in constant, agonizing pain. The medical community was slow to grasp the true nature of the horror unfolding. Radium was still a relatively new element, its long-term effects on the human body largely unknown. It was Marie Curie's discovery, a substance that seemed to defy the very laws of physics with its endless energy. What wasn't understood was that when ingested, the human body mistakes radium for calcium. The radium, carried in the bloodstream, settles in the bones, where it begins its relentless, deadly work. The alpha particles emitted by the decaying radium atoms act like microscopic machine guns, tearing apart the surrounding cells, corrupting the bone marrow, and turning the very skeleton of its victims into a source of their own destruction. The glow that had once seemed so magical was in fact the glow of their own slow-motion execution. Grace Fryer, a woman of remarkable intelligence and fortitude, refused to accept the company's dismissals and the medical community's ignorance. Despite her deteriorating health and the immense pain she endured, she resolved to fight back. She began the arduous task of finding a doctor who would listen and a lawyer who would dare to take on a powerful corporation like U.S. Radium. For 2 years, she was met with rejection after rejection. Lawyers were intimidated by the company's wealth and influence, and the medical establishment was still deeply divided on the dangers of radium. Finally, in 1927, a young, ambitious lawyer named Raymond Berry agreed to take their case. By this time, Grace had been joined by 5 other women: Edna Hussman, Quinta MacDonald, Albina Larice, and Catherine Schaub. Together, they became known as the Radium Girls. Their lawsuit was a monumental undertaking. The statute of limitations for workplace injury cases was only 2 years, and the women's symptoms had taken much longer to manifest. The U.S. Radium Corporation used every legal maneuver to delay the proceedings, hoping that the women would die before they had their day in court. The media latched on to the story, and the plight of the Radium Girls became a national sensation. Newspapers across the country ran headlines that were both sensational and sympathetic. The public was captivated by the tragic story of the Ghost Girls, their youthful dreams turned to dust by the very substance that had once been hailed as a miracle. The case became a crucible for the burgeoning field of occupational safety and workers' rights. As the legal battle raged, the women's health continued to decline. When they were finally called to testify, some were so weak they had to be carried into the courtroom. They could not raise their arms to take the oath. The physical evidence of their suffering was undeniable. Their bodies were literally falling apart. One of the most haunting pieces of evidence came from an expert who tested the breath of the women with a device called an electroscope. He found that their exhalations were radioactive. The very air they breathed out was laced with the poison that was killing them. The turning point in the case came with the exhumation of Molly Magia's body. A forensic examination revealed that her bones were still glowing, a testament to the massive amount of radium she had ingested. The scientific evidence was now irrefutable. The lip, dip, paint technique had been a death sentence. Faced with a mountain of damning evidence and mounting public outrage, the U.S. Radium Corporation finally agreed to a settlement in the spring of 1928. Each of the 5 women received a lump sum of $10,000 and an annual pension of $600 for as long as they lived, along with the coverage of all their medical and legal expenses. It was a landmark victory, but a bittersweet one. For most of the women, it came too late. Catherine Schaub, the weakened, continued to fight. She and the others had won their case, but they knew there were countless other dial painters across the country who were still being exposed to the same dangers. Their struggle had brought the issue to light, and it led to a wave of reforms. The story of the Radium Girls was instrumental in the establishment of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, and the creation of laws that protected workers from hazardous materials. The legacy of the Radium Girls is one of both tragedy and triumph. They were ordinary young women who were placed in an extraordinary and terrible situation. They were told they were working with a miracle substance, only to discover it was a potent poison. They were dismissed, discredited, and left to die by a company that valued profits over human lives. But in their final years, racked with pain and facing certain death, they found a strength they never knew they had. They fought for justice, not just for themselves, but for all the workers who would come after them. Their story is a chilling reminder of the human cost of progress and the corporate greed that can accompany it. But it is also a powerful testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. The light of the radium that consumed them from within was ultimately eclipsed by the light of their own courage, a light that continues to shine, illuminating the path toward a safer and more just world for all. The Ghost Girls of Orange, New Jersey may have faded into the annals of history, but the echo of their struggle and the importance of their sacrifice will never be forgotten. They were the girls who brushed with magic and paid the ultimate price. But in doing so, they changed the world.
The settlement of 1928 was a watershed moment, a David and Goliath victory that resonated across the nation. For a brief period, it seemed as though justice had prevailed. The newspapers celebrated the courage of Grace Fryer and Catherine Schaub, hailing them as heroines who had taken on a corporate giant and won. But the ink on the settlement papers was barely dry when the cruel reality of their condition reasserted itself. The money provided a measure of comfort and paid for their mounting medical bills, but it could not buy back their health or their time. One by one, the women who had fought so valiantly succumbed to the poison that was woven into their very bones. Grace Fryer, the indomitable leader of the group, died within 2 years of the settlement. Catherine Schaub, who had endured so much, lived for several more years, a living testament to the horrific effects of radium poisoning. Her body became a map of her suffering, yet she continued to speak out to ensure their story was not forgotten. Quinta MacDonald and Albina Larice also passed away, their pensions tragically short-lived. The victory they had achieved was not for themselves, but for the future. Their case, however, had peeled back the curtain on a much wider tragedy. The Radium Corporation was not the only company using the deadly paint. In a small town in Illinois, nestled on the banks of the Fox River, another group of young women was painting dials for a company called the Radium Dial Company. The town was Ottawa, and the women who worked there were walking the same path as their counterparts in New Jersey, completely unaware of the fate that awaited them. The Radium Dial Company, at a glance, seemed a model employer. It was run by a charismatic and respected man named Joseph Kelly. The company took over a former high school building, and the work environment was congenial and clean. The pay was excellent, and the work, just as in New Jersey, was seen as artistic and glamorous. The Ottawa girls, too, practiced the lip-dip paint technique, believing the assurances of their managers that the glowing substance was perfectly safe. They, too, painted their fingernails and wore their best dresses to parties, delighting in the faint, ethereal glow they emitted in the dark. Among them was a woman named Catherine Donahue. Fiery, eloquent, and deeply principled, Catherine was a natural leader. She loved her job and the camaraderie of the studio. She worked alongside her friends, women like Charlotte Purcell and Pearl Payne, sharing stories, dreams, and laughter over their delicate, deadly work. For years, life was good, but by the early 1930s, the shadows that had fallen over Orange, New Jersey, began to creep into Ottawa, Illinois. It started with a limp for one woman, a sore hip for another. Catherine herself began to feel a gnawing pain in her jaw. When she went to her dentist, he was horrified to find her jawbone had become soft and was crumbling away. He pulled a tooth, and a large chunk of her jaw came with it. The stories from New Jersey had made their way to Ottawa, but the Radium Dial Company had a strategy to counter the rising fear. They hired their own doctors to examine the women, doctors who invariably declared them to be in perfect health. They commissioned scientific studies that were designed from the outset to conclude that radium, in the quantities the women ingested, was harmless. It was a sophisticated and cynical campaign of disinformation designed to protect the company's bottom line. Joseph Kelly, a man the women had once trusted, now turned against them. He publicly insisted that the ailments were unrelated to the work and went so far as to fire women who started to show visible signs of illness, accusing them of trying to build a fraudulent lawsuit against him. The company even tried to tarnish the reputations of the sick women, spreading rumors and trying to isolate them from their community. But they underestimated Catherine Donahue. As her body weakened, her resolve hardened. She knew what was happening to her and her friends was a direct result of the paint they had been encouraged to swallow every day. She found a lawyer, Leonard Grossman, one of the few willing to take on the powerful Radium Dial Company. Grossman was a tenacious advocate who, like Raymond Barry in New Jersey, immediately faced an uphill battle. The company used the same delaying tactics, hoping Catherine and the other women would die before the case ever reached a courtroom. The Illinois case was, in many ways, even more fraught than the one in New Jersey. The Great Depression had a stranglehold on the country, and the Radium Dial Company was one of the few stable employers in Ottawa. Many in the town sided with the company, fearing that a lawsuit would force it to close, devastating the local economy. Catherine and the other plaintiffs were ostracized. They were seen as troublemakers who were putting the town's prosperity at risk. They faced their legal battle not as celebrated heroines, but as pariahs in their own community. Meanwhile, the scientific understanding of their condition had grown more sophisticated, thanks in large part to the work of a brilliant and compassionate medical examiner in New Jersey named Dr. Harrison Martland. Martland had been one of the first to definitively link the dial painter's illnesses to radium. He meticulously studied the women, conducted autopsies, and developed the breath tests that could measure the radon gas being exhaled from their decaying bones. Martland explained how the radium, once ingested, lay dormant for years. Its half-life was 1,600 years, meaning it would continue to emit its destructive alpha particles inside the women's bodies for millennia. The relentless internal radiation was what caused the radium necrosis in their jaws, the sarcomas that grow on their bones, and the aplastic anemia that destroyed their blood. Dr. Martlin's work painted a horrifyingly clear picture. He explained how the radium, once ingested, lay dormant for years. Its half-life was 1,600 years, meaning it would continue to emit its destructive alpha particles inside the women's bodies for millennia. The relentless internal radiation was what caused the radium necrosis in their jaws, the sarcomas that grew on their bones, and the aplastic anemia that destroyed their blood. Dr. Martlin's work provided the undeniable scientific foundation that Leonard Grossman would use to fight for Catherine Donahue. The trial was a grueling ordeal. The Radium Dial Company's lawyers were ruthless, attacking the women's characters and trying to dismiss Dr. Martlin's science. But Catherine Donahue refused to be silenced. By the time she was called to testify, she was emaciated and bedridden, weighing less than 70 pounds. Her jaw had almost entirely been removed, and she was in constant, excruciating pain. Unable to travel to the courthouse, the judge and the lawyers convened in her bedroom. From her deathbed, Catherine Donahue gave her testimony. Her voice was weak, but her words were powerful and clear. She described the work, the assurances of safety, the fun they had with the glowing paint, and then she described the onset of the pain, the decay of her body, and the company's cruel betrayal. It was a moment of profound and tragic drama. Her testimony, delivered with quiet dignity in the face of immense suffering, was devastating to the company's defense. The press reported every harrowing detail, and public opinion, which had been divided, swung decisively in favor of the women. Catherine Donahue and her co-plaintiffs won their case. The Illinois Industrial Commission ruled in their favor, but the Radium Dial Company appealed, dragging the process out even further. Catherine knew she was running out of time. In a race to death, Leonard Grossman took the case all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. In 1938, the court refused to hear the company's final appeal, effectively upholding the lower court's decision. Justice, at long last, was secured. Catherine Donahue died just a few months later. She had lived just long enough to see her name cleared and her fight vindicated. Her victory and the victory of the other Ottawa women had consequences that rippled far beyond their small town. Their case established critical legal precedents, affirming that employers were responsible for the illnesses their workers contracted on the job, even if those illnesses took years to appear. The combined struggles of the Radium Girls in both New Jersey and Illinois forced a national reckoning. The era of blissful ignorance about the dangers of radioactivity was over. Industrial safety standards were completely rewritten. The practice of lip-dip paint was banned. Workers handling radioactive materials were now required to wear protective gear. The cases directly led to the strengthening of the U.S. Department of Labor and were a major impetus for the later creation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA. The legacy of these women is written in the labor laws that protect millions of workers today. It is a legacy forged in unimaginable suffering, but defined by incredible courage. They were not scientists or politicians. They were factory girls, daughters, sisters, and friends who were asked to paint with starlight and were poisoned by it instead. When their employers and their community turned their backs on them, they stood up and fought back. They went to their graves glowing with the radium that had stolen their lives. But their true luminescence came from their unyielding fight for justice. The light of the Radium Girls, a light of warning and of hope, has never gone out.